Hi class. Today we're going to learn about Chapter 2A, which is the chemistry of life. It's kind of a recap of some of the things you learned in physical science, but it's necessary for you to remember those things to move on to biology. Alright, so if we're going to study the chemistry of life, we need to talk about what is chemistry. It is the science of matter and the changes that it undergoes. So the changes of things that are going on. Matter is in that definition, so you need to remember that matter is anything that has mass and takes up space, which is also called volume. You can see the states of matter here, solid, liquid, gas, and then plasma in the pictures. I feel like you already know those things, so we'll skip over that. And we will get to atoms and subatomic particles. Atoms, you know, are composed of 3 different kinds of subatomic particles. You can see them in the picture. This is one atom of beryllium. It is element number 4, that is its atomic number. You can see in the picture 4 protons. That's the atomic number. And those protons are what actually gives beryllium these properties that are over here to the side. It does all of these things because of that. The other subatomic particles are still important though. The protons are the red ones, we talked about those already. They're positively charged. The blue ones in this picture are the neutrons. They are neutral. They give them the atom mass. We'll talk about those in a little bit. And then the electrons that you can see outside of the nucleus, orbiting around the nucleus in these what are called sometimes shells or orbits or orbitals. But they're not in the nucleus, they're outside of there, and they are negatively charged. And they also do give properties to an atom. And again, we'll talk about those in a minute. All right, so you have this table on your notes. We're going to fill this in together. Again, this is recap and review, so we're going to do this pretty quickly. Protons are positively charged. They have a mass of 1 AMU. That 1 AMU right there, that 1 AMU, that stands for atomic mass unit. It's down here. It's a very tiny measurement. You can see all the decimals right there. It's a very tiny portion of a gram. Tiny, tiny, tiny. They do exist in the nucleus. And then under other information, the number doesn't change. Beryllium always has 4 protons. Carbon always has 6 protons. Whatever element it is defined by the number of protons that it has. And we call it the atomic number. All right, neutrons are next. Neutrons have no charge. They're neutral, hence the name neutron. They still have the mass of 1 AMU, very similar to the mass of a proton, and they are in the nucleus. The number of neutrons can change that is in an atom, and it still can stay the same atom. Those are called isotopes. It can change the mass, but it doesn't really change its properties. It can make it radioactive, and that's a different unit. Electrons are next. Electrons are negatively charged. They do have a mass, of course, but it's so small that for our purposes, we're going to call it 0. They exist in the shell or the cloud or the orbits or the orbitals around the outside, not in the nucleus. And their number can change. We'll talk about ions in a little bit. It does change the charge and how it reacts in the world. At the bottom are some pictures. This first one is just showing another atom's atomic structure the way that we draw it. Now, this isn't what an atom really looks like, but this is the best way that we have to put it on paper to show what it's made of. In the nucleus, you can see there protons and neutrons. And the electrons are flying around the outside, and here they're just shown in the locations where they're more likely to be found. The stadium is here. You might think, what the heck's that doing there? That is there because that is my favorite idea, a way to visualize what an atom is as far as size. If you envision a ball in the middle of this stadium, that would be about the size of the nucleus. And then the whole rest of the stadium would be about the size of this electron cloud or these shells. This is where the electrons are, flying around the outside. There are places where you're more likely going to find those flies, by the garbage can, or by the food vendors, things like that. That would be their orbits that we show them here, their shells or orbitals where they exist. But they really can be anywhere at any given time, just like a fly could be anywhere in a stadium. That gives you an idea of how much space the nucleus actually takes up, a very tiny amount compared to the size of the entire atom, which is mostly open space. All right, this one says atoms are different because they have different numbers of subatomic particles. So again, the number of protons defines the element. 1 proton makes it hydrogen. 2 protons makes it helium. 3 protons makes it lithium. Different characteristics. And there's copper. It has 29 protons. Remember, they don't really look like that. This is just how they are drawn on paper. The periodic table is kind of a magical thing. It's organized in so many different ways by properties and by all different kinds of things. You'll learn that in chemistry, but we will use it a little bit in this unit just to refer to the different atoms and some of their characteristics. The atomic number is always the smaller number in the box. It's the number of protons, the symbol, the name, and then here, this one, is the atomic mass or the atomic weight. The higher number in each box is the protons and neutrons together. Each one of them has a mass of 1, so their total is the mass of the atom. Sometimes you'll see these numbers are not whole numbers. That is because they take the average of all the atoms that exist that we know of. Okay, so again, if we're looking at a periodic table box, the atomic number, the symbol, the name, and the atomic mass, there's one. This is an average mass for a random carbon in the universe. Sometimes we talk about specific carbons, and then we know, for example here, this one has 6 neutrons and 6 protons. This particular carbon has a mass of 12. And this one would also have a mass of 12. Atomic number is the number of protons and generally the number of electrons when it's neutral. And then the mass number is protons plus neutrons together. And we do draw the structures like this with 2 in the first shell and then 8 after that for simplicity's sake. So let's do one together. Here is sodium. Its atomic number is 11. So we're going to put that there. The mass number is a larger number on the square, so that's going to be 23. This is rounded. The mass number is protons plus neutrons. Remember that? So we're going to put that there for a second. The number of protons, hopefully you remember, is the same as the atomic number, so that's easy. That's 11. The number of neutrons, that one you have to actually calculate. This is protons plus neutrons. So if we have 23 total, 11 of them are protons. We can do a little subtraction problem there and get that we have 12 neutrons. And the number of electrons in a neutral atom is the same as protons. 11 pluses and 11 minuses makes it neutral. Now to draw the atomic structure, you were going to say what's in the nucleus. 2 things you know in the nucleus, always those protons. And in this case, there are 11 of them. And then there are 12 neutrons. We're going to put those in there as well. The electrons, though, are not in the nucleus. They're orbiting around the outside, flying around out there with all their energy. To go in the first shell or first orbit, you can make little e's with a negative or dots or whatever. These are our electrons. So there's an electron and there's an electron. Only 2 will fit in this first energy level, so we have to now move out. We're going for a total of 11. So let's put another one here. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Our next level will only hold 8, so now we have a total of 10. We need 1 more, so now we have 11 electrons. The number of valence electrons, valence is a word, hopefully you remember this one. Valence means how many are in the outer shell. So right now our outer shell is this one here, and we just have 1. So the number of valence electrons is 1, and that'll become very important in our next topic. Most atoms are neutral. That means they have no charge. If we look at this, the way that they get to be neutral is because they have an equal number of protons, which are positive, and electrons, which are negative. So they cancel out. So lithium, for example, has 3 protons, and it has 1, 2, 3 electrons, which are each negative. Add that up, it's neutral. All right, same thing here. 8 pluses, 8 minuses outside, neutral, no charge. Same thing here. 20 positive protons, 20 negative electrons, neutral, no charge. But in nature, atoms don't really like to stay neutral. They like to lose or gain electrons to get a full valence shell. All right, so these are called ions, and they're really, really important in biology. They make a lot of things, processes in the body occur, so we need to know what they are. Ions are atoms with a charge or with charges. You're going to write this right next to the word ions on your paper. Atoms with charges, positive or negative. So if they have the same number of pluses and minuses, then they're neutral, they cancel out. But if they don't anymore, they're going to end up with an overall charge. So here's the example here. There is an electron here. It's negatively charged. And if it's moving from here to here, it's going to give a negative charge to this one. And this one is now going to be positively charged because a negative thing left it. All right, so let's talk about that a little bit. You have this picture. You're going to write on it and fill it in on your notes paper. So if we have a neutral atom, that means it has the same number of protons, oops, sorry about that, as it does electrons, neutral. But if it loses an electron, now it's going to have more protons, so it's going to be positively charged. We call those cations, or positively charged ions. The opposite is true over here. If we have an atom that gains an electron, it becomes negative. If you give it a negative thing, it becomes negatively charged. We call those anions. So make sure you have all those things written on your diagram there. A little way to remember this is that onions, this kind of looks like onion, right? Onions are gross and negative, and cats are cute and positive. So cations are positive and anions are negative. Let's look at this sodium over here. This sodium has the same one we drew earlier, one valence electron out here. They want to have a full valence shell. So this thing either needs to get 7 more, which is a lot, or it could get rid of that one. And if it gets rid of that one, which it did right here, then it does have a full valence shell. The next shell is now its outermost shell, and it is full. So this makes it stable, and that's how ions or atoms want to exist. So the sodium will lose one. If it loses a negative thing, it becomes positively charged. That can be a little difficult to remember, so here's a way. If you think about your friend group, there's always that one person who's a little negative. That kind of brings the vibe down if they're there with you. That person, think of them as an electron. And if they are negatively charged and they come with you to your gathering or whatever you're doing, if that electron comes with you, that makes your whole group a little more negative. But if that electron leaves, your whole group becomes a little more positive if they're not there. So think of that negative friend as an electron, and that might help you to remember that if they leave, you feel more positive, and if they enter, you feel a little more negative. Okay, so here's another example of a very common ionic compound. If you look at the diagram here, we have sodium again. It wants to lose this electron. Oops. It wants to lose this electron right here. Chlorine has 7 valence electrons. To fill up, it needs an 8th one, so it's going to gain it in there. Right now, it has 17 of each. See those two cancel out? 0 charge neutral. Here, 11 of each, 0 charge neutral. But if we transfer this one over here, now, chlorine still has 17 protons, that's why it's chlorine, but now it has 18 electrons, which gives it a Cl with a negative charge. Sometimes it's written -1, or sometimes just the minus sign means -1. This side, this one lost an electron, so now it still has 11 pluses, but now it only has 10 negative electrons. So it has an extra proton, making sodium be Na plus or Na plus 1. You could write that as well. That's a cation, positive, anion, negative. All right, recap. The next thing we're going to talk about is bonding, and when positives and negatives are near each other, they do attract, and that's an ionic bond, and we'll talk about that next time. But let's talk about for a minute why this matters. So ions are really important in the body. They are used to conduct electrical currents and run a lot of processes. This is actually how your muscles and your nerves work. In order for cell processes to occur, there has to be the right concentrations of different ions in your cells. They're sometimes called electrolytes, and you can get them from different kinds of sports drinks, and you can see them on the diagram there. It's really important to keep the levels of these ions consistent in your body for different functioning. All right, that's it for this portion of the notes. I hope you learned something, and we'll see you next time.